Hi, this is Carl, also known as Zarepath in the custom magic community, and I'm doing a short video on 7 cross-set synergies that we're going to lose when these sets rotate out. So the way that Custard works, Custard being a custom standard format of custom designed magic sets, there's going to be a big rotation later this year, I believe, unless it's the beginning of next year, where 3 sets are going to be rotating out. And those sets are Custom Core 2019, Hollows, and uh, Janata. Now, these sets have been in for a long time. We're pretty familiar with their cards, but I was doing some deck building the other day, and I noticed there were a bunch of interesting cards from these sets that we're not going to be able to brew with anymore. And it got me thinking, what combinations of cards are we going to lose? What kind of cross-set synergies should we be trying to build around now while we still can? And so I thought I'd make a short little video of some of those combinations. I hesitate to call them combos because traditionally in Magic, a combo produces an absurd amount of value or wins the game or does something equivalent to winning the game. Uh, most of these don't really do that. However, they do combine in very interesting ways, and I don't know if any of these really make a powerful deck, but they're certainly fun to look at and maybe deck build around, and maybe it prompts something in somebody else's deck building mind. So number 7, and these are ordered in what I thought are most likely to be powerful or useful. And the 7th most would be Faralyn's Gambit, is half of it. There's a card from Janata that's a weird card. It kind of does a Chaos Warp. Like I said, it has to be a creature that you target. And, it's just a very risky thing to be doing in 1v1 Magic, to get rid of their creature. If they have a big enough creature that you want to spend 3 mana at sorcery speed to remove it, they're pretty likely to have another big one in their deck somewhere, which makes this a very risky proposition. You can pay 5 mana and get a card out of it as well, so that, if that happens, it's not straight card disadvantage and you accidentally upgrade their creature you're already worried about. However, we can remove some of the downsides of this card by combining it with a card from, I have to do this, from Herald, Containment Priest. So if you look at, if a non-token creature would enter the battlefield and it wasn't cast, exile it instead. So Faralyn's Gambit doesn't let them cast it for free, it just lets them put it onto the battlefield, and Containment Priest will stop that. So Containment Priest nullifies the downside of Faralyn's Gambit, and it basically becomes 2 and a red sorcery, destroy target creature, maybe they get a land. Worst case scenario, they might get an O-Ring, I guess, off the top of their deck, but it lowers the downside of this card significantly. It's still probably, even then, not a great card, but I wonder if it then becomes potential sideboard card if you're in red-white aggro and you're already running Containment Priests, then this becomes a really interesting synergy there. So the next card I'm going to look at is also from Janata. Number 6, Gozani's Torture, is half the combo. Gozani's Torture is a card that I think, I've been looking at it for a while. This has the potential to discard 4 cards from an opponent for just 4 mana. All you need is 2 creatures in play when you do it. I think there's a lot of ways to take advantage of this. I think a black-white tokens list can do well with it. But, sometimes you don't get to 4 mana. Sometimes you need to be putting pressure down with your board instead of, using it to attack their hand. But one aggressive archetype I think it could go really well in is black-red elementals. And the reason is because of this card, Herald of Ankulim. So Herald of Ankulim does a ton of things for the elemental deck. It gives you, cheaper spells, cheaper token-making spells, cheaper elementals. But this also lowers the cost of, that 4 mana discard spell, Gozani's Torture, into 3 mana. So you could potentially curve directly from Herald on turn 2 into Gozani's Torture on turn 3, as long as you played a 1-drop creature. You know, if you're tight on mana, you don't hit 4 mana, which, you know, is fairly common in more aggressive bent decks. You know, you can cast another creature on turn 3, and then on your 4th turn, if you still have 3 mana, you can still do it. I think it works especially well in Black-Red Elementals, not just because one of its main creatures lowers its costs and can tap to copy it, but you also have Spiral Salamander, one of the main reasons to be in Black-Red Elementals. It creates 2 creatures and curves directly into Gozani's Torch. You play this on 3, you torture them on turn 4. And, you know, being able to 4 for 1 with a single card is just astounding value. And then the other big card is Ankulim Spawn, which only costs a red if you have Herald of Ankulim. And, you know, this is just going to help. These are cards that are naturally good in the deck already. They're already going to be helping you flood the board, and they just curve really nicely into landing a Gozani's Torture for quite a lot of value. So that's another cross-set synergy that I'd look at. Gozani's Torture and Herald of Ankulim and the Black-Red Elemental Suite. Okay, number 5 is Reality Inversion. This is a weird card. Not until I started making this video did I ever really look at it and think, well, how would you best abuse this? Switching all creatures' power and toughness till end of turn. I guess maybe you want a deck where you have a lot of big butts on your creatures, but they still have to have 1 power so that when you switch them, they don't die. Well, luckily, we kind of have an enabler in a recent set, and Court Sponsor. You know, it's a 3-mana 1/4. This is purely a limited card, basically, but it does become a card advantage engine if you're playing a lot of creatures with power 2 or less, which happens to be exactly what a Reality Inversion deck wants to do. You want to be casting constructed all-stars like Coveted Stallion or Sahai Nomad, also from Janata, or Apprentice Lunamancer, which, you know, gets 4 toughness when you cast Reality Inversion and then becomes a 4-mana beater. Then you have things like Pale Dragonoid, which can... Oh, actually, that one's not that great. I was thinking Cirrus Winder, you know, a 4-power flyer for 3 mana. Wealthy Merchants helps give you some mana as well as being able to beat down for 4. In practice, I don't know how well this can work against opponents because they'll learn to block your 1-power attacking horned turtles, and then you just end up trading with their creatures with Reality Inversion, or you just hold on to it. But being able to keep them on the back foot with your aggressive horned turtles is kind of hilarious. And I don't think this becomes a great deck, but it's definitely one that I want to try and test before the format kicks Janata and Reality Inversion out. So that's number 5, Reality Inversion plus Court Sponsor and other horned turtle creatures. Number 4 is Enforcer of the Wild. Enforcer of the Wild, another janky Janata card. You'll notice a pattern here. Janky Janata card that, you know, reads kind of interestingly at the beginning of each player's upkeep. You get all the lands. So each player gets all the lands each turn. That turns off instant speed stuff from the opponent. It turns off... Yeah, I mean, it turns off instant speed for your opponent, which can be powerful. It gives you a ton of land. Unfortunately, they get to do it first, and the last thing you want to do in 1v1 Magic is give them a ton of mana for nothing, and then hope they don't abuse it somehow, because most good decks are built to take advantage of extra mana. You have things like Incendiary Revel, you have just a lot of activated abilities that cost mana. You have Resurrect on Screecher, things like that. So how do we remove the downside of this card? There's a couple different cards in recent sets that can use it, and one is Witch's Invocation. I don't know why apostrophes don't work in the search here. If you can cast Enforcer of the Wild with Flash at the end of your opponent's turn, you get all the lands first. You get all their lands. And you doing it as a surprise can be good, because if they were holding up mana to do something at instant speed on your turn, they no longer have that opportunity because you just took all their lands without them realizing that was going to happen. So then you get all the lands first, and you can abuse the mana before they ever get a chance. And there's some various things you can do to potentially lock up the game at that point. Just cast big things. That's always a good thing. If we're doing Witch's Invocation, maybe we have Soul Confluences as well, because that's another card that's really good to play at instant speed, and also a great way to spend lots of mana, should you have lots of mana, because you get to play things for free and draw cards that you can use with extra mana. Just a very powerful thing to be able to do. You can do Clean Slate. So take all the lands and then destroy all the lands. You could have destroyed all the lands in the first place, but you get to use the advantage of all of the mana before you do so to build up a board and then destroy everything. So, Enforcer of the Wild does give each player all the lands, but at that point, there's no lands to be giving them. And that's also another great card to cast at instant speed if you're doing Witch's Invocation in this. The other really mean thing you can do is play this guy, Rico of the Broken Grove, and use their mana from their lands to sacrifice their lands and make some warriors. And then the next thing you want to do is sacrifice Enforcer of the Wild using any number of various sacrifice outlets, which is Trusty Patches, or just a Fiery Flame, or Hungering Knight, just the various sacrifice outlets that there are in the format. And that can do that can be a brutal play as well. You steal all the lands, sacrifice theirs, and sacrifice your Enforcer, and then they've basically lost all their lands, and you've made some warriors, which is just kind of a silly thing you can do. So Enforcer of the Wild plus Witch's Invocation is number 4. Number 3 is Sincaller. This is a card that it looks just absurdly strong. Like, this just seems like a great card, generates a lot of value, doesn't even have a real tough mana requirement. You just have to barely be black, which makes me think that this should be in some absurdly powerful deck. But the fact that it costs 4 and the format is a little bit fast, I feel like in the format right now, people are playing very aggressive decks or very big decks, and those tend to be the most successful. And this is just a little bit too in the middle. But there's some interesting cards in recent sets that it combines well with. One is, well, the one. So, whenever a creature you control dies, you draw a card. Another one is Merchant of Flesh in Urshad, Scriptures of Urshad. And this has a very similar effect, except instead of you drawing a card when one of your creatures dies, you get a treasure token. One of the issues with these kinds of effects is, it's nice to be able to get lots of treasure, but without cards to spend that mana on, it's kind of pointless. And vice versa with Sincaller. It's nice to be able to get lots of cards, but with a lot of mana, you might not have the tempo to be able to take advantage of that card advantage. Well, if you can manage both of these and play at once, they kind of solve each other's problems, and you're getting a card and a mana every time you trash a creature. Then you start combining that with some ridiculous things like Final Flame, or just a bunch of tokens and any random aristocrat sacrifice outlet. You're generating a lot of mana and cards, giving you more things to sacrifice, and giving you more mana and cards, and it just gets really stupid. So, I mentioned Final Flame earlier. For those who don't know what it does, it's more of a combo piece, but it can create lots of value in decks like this. Sacrifice a creature, make 2 tokens. So let's say you had a couple of Merchants of Flesh, sacrifice one of them, and you get 2 more, and you get extra tokens. Use that to play more creatures that you can sacrifice, and you can start an absurd value train. In addition, you have Vibrant Rapture, which you know, those other creatures I just showed, they had 2 and 1 toughness, I think. What was a Merchant of Flesh? Yeah, 2 toughness. Well, if you do Vibrant Rapture with Merchant in play, if you can kill a lot of your own stuff, but make tons of petals, and if you're drawing cards at the same time from Sincaller, you get lots of cards to spend it on. It's just kind of a stupid thing that can, in effect, storm off if you build the deck correctly and you can survive long enough and the turn sets up well enough. The basic idea of this deck I read from CFT Sock on the Discord, so credit to him, credit to them. And yeah, but the Sincaller Merchant of Flesh combo is one I've been looking at, and I think there's a bunch of different ways to take advantage of it. So that's a fun deck that I'd love to see more of before Sincaller rotates out. And, you know, one of my favorite cards you could probably throw in as a one of. Grizzly Amalgam also goes interestingly with Sincaller. You can discard it to pay for the hollow cost. If you want to get a Sincaller back into play and it's already in your graveyard, you can use it as the discard cost for hollow. And then just bring it back into play by sacrificing a couple other creatures and paying mana for it. I think, you know, a single Grizzly Amalgam would go a long way in a deck like that. Okay, so that was number 3. Number 2, Hellfire Chandler. We're back to the janky Janata stuff. This, it's a 2/2 for 4 mana, kind of a weak body. It does give your spells Death Touch, which is kind of fun, but I mean, how well can you abuse that? Anytime you can kill an opponent's creature with your spell, then it gets bigger, which is nice, but that's not really the main highlight of this card that we want to abuse. The Death Touch, giving Death Touch to your spells is the best thing. Well, there's got to be some kind of spell that can abuse this, and there is. It's called Blazing Volley from Herald. It's a 1-mana Plague Wind, which is crazy good. If you have Hellfire Chandler and then you cast a Blazing Volley, you wipe their board and your Hellfire Chandler gets bigger. It's just an incredible thing to be able to do. Unfortunately, Hellfire Chandler by itself is bad enough that it's very difficult to just run it in a deck and hope you find that synergy with Blazing Volley. But I really wonder if there's some way, if you have another deck with just lots of instant speed damaging that you can use to kill things, maybe this becomes better. Like if you just combine it with shocks, right? If you have shocks in your deck, which is really good against these very fast aggro decks, but then you're also worried about bigger ramp decks, which are prevalent in the format right now, like Crest, things that ramp up a lot using cards like Jobaya or Sylvan Primalist, whatever it's called, right? Yeah, Sylvan, no, that's not it. Sylvan Ritualist. Well, you can maybe run that and your shocks turn into Doomblades at the same time. So that's number 2 is Hellfire Chandler plus Blazing Volley. Number 1 is this old thing, Notion Thief, another reprint card. This is from Custom Core. I guess it's Custom Core 2018, not 19. My bad. This can be abused if they're, in real Magic, people use it against like Brainstorms and Sphinx's Revelations, things like that, where your opponent's about to have a bunch of cards, but instead of them getting them, you get to draw that many cards. It can be a huge blowout in many cases. It's rarely seen in main decks for the main reason that you don't often run main decks something that is going to give your opponent cards. I mean, why would you ever do that? That in almost every case, it's just a bad idea to run cards that give your opponents cards. It's hardly ever worth it, and so therefore it's hardly ever worth also running Notion Thief. However, there's a controversial card in Custard right now that I think is not good. I don't think it's a good card, but a lot of people do. And in this case, I think it actually becomes a very interesting card. So, and that card is Lazaro's Altar. Lazaro's Altar has an interesting mini game that you play with your opponent on each of your upkeeps, where you can use it like a Phyrexian Arena, where you draw a card and you lose a life. Or you can use it as ramp, where you give yourself a treasure token each turn. Unfortunately, whichever one of those you choose, the opponent gets the other side of that. So if you want to be drawing cards, giving them mana, I don't know if that drawback is worth this card, because, like I said earlier, other players can use mana well if they're running a pretty good deck. Vice versa, if you really need mana, giving your opponent more cards and more options cannot be good. As I again said earlier, giving your opponent more cards is not something you want to be doing in Magic. However, if you have Lazare's Altar out in combination with Notion Thief, then you just choose to get a Petal and give them the Phyrexian Arena. They're going to lose a life and draw a card, except they're not going to draw the card. They just lose a life, and you draw the card. So Lazare's Altar reads, beginning of your upkeep target, it just says, get a Lotus Petal and draw a card. Target opponent loses 1 life. It becomes an incredibly good value engine and mana accelerant. And it's slowly killing them at the same time. This gets even better because Notion Thief isn't the only card in the format that does what it does. We also have Bazaar Crook from Janata, another card that will be rotating out at the same time as Notion Thief. If an opponent would draw a card, except the first one they draw in each of their draw steps, instead they skip that draw and you draw the card. So same thing, it'll be on your turn. It's not during their draw step, so they would be getting a card off your altar, except instead you get that card. And this would actually combine with other draw effects in your deck. So maybe Bazaar Crook is a better thing to have in your main deck if you have other ways of abusing it, as well as Lazare's Altar. But just a really powerful synergy that actually makes Lazare's Altar insane. Just an incredibly great enchantment to have. And if you can get Bazaar Crook in a shell that is doing other things it can take advantage of, just like Opt even, or to Oko's Curiosity, just standard cantrips to help your card flow, help you find your altars and removal spells. This makes those great as well. So there you have it. That's the number 1 on my list of 7 cross-set synergies that are going to disappear when rotation happens in some number of months. Just to review those, number 7 was Faralyn's Gambit with Containment Priest. Kind of a silly removal combo there. And then Gozani's Torture, which can make a lot of value with Herald of Ankulim and the Black-Red Elemental deck that can just churn out a lot of tokens. And then Reality Inversion for the silly switching power and toughness deck with Court Sponsor and all of those 1/4s. That was number 5. Number 4 was Enforcer of the Wild with Witch's Invocation, so you can be the first one to get all the lands instead of your opponent, and then you can do all kinds of crazy stuff on your turn before they ever get a chance. And then number 3 was Sincaller plus Merchant of Flesh for just some crazy aristocrat turns that can kind of storm through your deck and create all kinds of cards and mana for you. And then number 2 was Hellfire Chandler plus Blazing Volley. And then the number 1 cross-set synergy that will disappear is, in my opinion, Notion Thief plus Lazare's Altar. Although instead of Notion Thief, you can use Bazaar Crook. And that might probably be a better thing to build a deck around. So, too many A's there. So there you have it. Just some cross-set synergies to, spark your deck building brain. Hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.